Section 1, Europe in the Early Middle Ages. Background knowledge. The collapse of the Roman Empire in the West left Europe without a central authority. In many parts of Europe, Germanic kings established new kingdoms. In this section, we will read about the geography of Europe and its influence on life after the fall of Rome. The geography of Europe. People often speak of Europe and Asia as two continents. In fact, a glance at the globe shows that the Eurasian landmass is one very large unbroken area of land. Europe juts out from this huge landmass like a giant peninsula. In this picture, you'll see how they're all connected. And this is Europe over here. A peninsula of peninsulas. Geographers will often describe Europe as a peninsula of peninsulas. Smaller peninsulas extend into the surrounding seas. In the north, the Scandinavian peninsula divides the Atlantic Ocean from the Baltic Sea. A smaller peninsula called Jutland jets north from the mainland. In southern Europe, the Iberian, Italian, and Balkan peninsulas extend into the Mediterranean Sea. Let's see. Here's the Iberian Peninsula, the Italian Peninsula, and the Balkan Peninsula. Mountains and plains. Europe has a wide variation in its topography or arrangement of physical features. Mountain ranges edge the continent on the north and the south. At its center, Europe has broad plains. In the north, a broken range of mountains runs along the Scandinavian peninsula. The Alps, a higher mountain system from an arc across southern Europe. These high peaks, helped protect the Mediterranean world from would-be invaders. To the west, the Pyrenees divide Spain from France, and the British Isles rest across a narrow channel of water from the European mainland. The North European plain is the fertile heart of the continent. It stretches from the vineyards of France through the thick forests of Germany and into Eastern Europe. This plain was the corridor for migrating peoples from Eastern Europe. Europe's topography affects its climate, except in the far north. Moist westerly winds blow landward from the oceans, bringing rain. That gives most of the Western Europe a relatively warm, moist climate year-round. However, mountains block these winds from reaching the Mediterranean countries. As a result, they have a Mediterranean climate, hot, dry summers with rainfall in the winters. Waterways. Europe's rivers flow in several directions from the central mountains and highlands. Broad rivers are highways for trade. They bring water to farmland and form natural boundaries. Many European cities were built on rivers. The longest rivers in Western Europe are the Rhine and the Danube. In Roman times, they marked the eastern and northern borders of the Roman Empire. The Danube flows eastward for more than 1,770 miles. It crosses the broad central plains into Eastern Europe, emptying into the Black Sea. The Rhine runs northward through Germany and the Netherlands until reaching the North Sea. Its waters carry fine soil that is deposited along the way, building up rich farmland. Migrants and invaders. Over time, Europe attracted many different peoples. By the first century AD, the Romans occupied much of the Western Europe. In the late 300s, Germanic tribes began to migrate into the Roman Empire. Some, such as the Burgundians, settled in the foothills of the Alps. Others, such as the Angles, Saxons, and the Jutes, moved across the North Sea to become residents of the British Isles. Their dramatic migration signaled the beginning of a new period of European history known as the Middle Ages. This is the period between the collapse of the Roman Empire, about AD 500, and the beginning of the modern age, about AD 1500. Modern history began when Europeans began to explore the rest of the world and to take new steps in the arts and sciences. Historians also use the term medieval, which means related to the Middle Ages, to describe this period. New kingdoms in Europe. Historians often describe the beginning of the Middle Ages as a dark age, a terrible time when Roman civilization had vanished. In those early years, Germanic tribes divided Europe into a patchwork of small warring kingdoms. But even though Roman government had collapsed, many aspects of Roman life, such as its roads and water systems, survived. People still created art and learned Latin, and rulers dreamed of creating a new empire to carry on the legacy of Rome. The rise of the Franks. After the Western Roman Empire fell, various Germanic tribes established kingdoms in the Roman Gaul. As we have read in chapter 1, the Frankish leader Clovis defeated the last Roman army in Gaul in AD 486. Next, he took over several Germanic kingdoms. By the early 530s, the Franks controlled much of the land in present-day France and Germany. The Franks grew rich from their conquests, but they never established a strong central government. By the year 700, the Frankish kingdom had splintered into smaller local kingdoms. A new line of kings. In 717, a leader named Charles Martel reunited the Frankish lands. His name, which means Charles the Hammer, described him well. Charles Martel hammered down all the rivals and enemies. His most famous victory was the defeat of Spanish Muslim invaders at Tours in 732. This was one of the last Muslim military surges northward into Western Europe. Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, became the first king of a new dynasty. It was called the Carolingian, from the Latin form of the name Charles. Pepin's son, Charles, became one of the most famous rulers of the early Middle Ages. History knows him as Charlemagne or Charles the Great. This is a picture of what Charlemagne's empire ended up looking like. Charlemagne's empire. Charles became king in 768 when he was about 26 years old. He was a devout Christian who wanted to build a Christian empire in Europe. During his long reign, he was constantly fighting to expand his realm. Charlemagne's fiercest campaign was a 30-year struggle against the pagan Saxons in northern Germany. The defeated Saxons had to convert to Christianity or be killed. Charlemagne's army also crossed the Pyrenees Mountains to attack the Muslim rulers of Spain. This campaign was not a victory for the Franks, but its heroes became legends. They inspired a great epic poem, the Song of Roland. By the year 800, Charlemagne's empire included most of Central and Western Europe. As the map shows, it stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Adriatic Sea. See. Charlemagne was a just ruler who encouraged law and learning. He enjoyed music and set up a palace school and library. He learned Greek and Latin in order to study history. A monk at his court described him in this way: Charles was large and strong and of a lofty stature. The upper part of his head was round, his eyes very large and animated, nose a little long, hair fair, and face laughing and merry. Thus his appearance was always stately and dignified, whether he was standing or sitting. Charlemagne's empire did not have a strong government structure like that of Roman Empire. He ruled his empire personally, riding on horseback from one palace to another. In battle, he depended on his nobles, not on a professional army. He also depended on the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church to support his rule. The church, in turn, benefited from Charlemagne's efforts to create a Christian empire. We will read more about the cooperation between Charlemagne and the Roman Catholic Church in chapter 15. Charlemagne died in 814, but his power and personality were so great that his empire continued for some time after his death. Within about 40 years, however, quarrels among his grandsons had divided the empire. Noble families gained power and took control of separate regions. Looking back and ahead, in this section, we have read about the geography of Europe and have seen how new rulers and ways of life arose in medieval Europe. In the next section, we will read about Christianity in the Middle Ages.